What is up guys, Oxel here. In today's video I'm going to present to you a comprehensive video that I've been working on for quite a while. This is going to be on builds for League Start 3.18. It is going to go character by character, so the base characters, Duelist, Ranger, etc, and it's going to tell you which builds you can start with according to each base character and which skills that is going to be, and then for character by character which skills you can transition into for endgame mapping. So this video is perfect for the people that want to start with the character, level it up, start with something that is easy to build, make a build with that, and then transition into something without leveling a different character. So I'm going to list to you all the starter skills and what characters they start on, then all the endgame builds and what characters you can transition into on those skills. So stay tuned. Since this is also going to be quite a long video, please make sure to make use of the timestamps in the slide bar for the video. I'm going to timestamp all of the different characters or the different sections just to make it a bit easier for you to find if you already have an idea about what you want to play or what you're looking for. So to start off, to set some ground rules, there's basically a different couple of things we need to make sure you understand. So what I'm going to go over in this video is the mapper part of builds, essentially categorizing it into speed mappers, magic finders, and juicers. Those I will be going over, but we also have the categories of characters that will be for bossing, which I will not be going over in this video, and the others that I might not include very optimized builds for, such as lab runners, heist, logbooks, contracts, etc. So to start off, for the speed mappers, we are going to have characters that will be using very high movement speed or very fast movement abilities or movement skills. We're using abilities that clear very fast, such as Tornado Shot, Kinetic Blast. We also have the Winter Orbs and such. These skills are essentially skills with very large AoE or skills that spread, which means like Essence Drain, Contagion. You can clear large areas very quickly. These builds often sacrifice single target for a lot of speed clearing or movement speed, as I said, so the single target might be a bit lacking, essentially why these characters aren't suited for bossing, but they should also have just enough damage to comfortably clear every map content that you can do. Then we also have the magic finders. These are characters that will use increased item quantity and increased item rarity on their gear to find more items, and then rarer items, which will be very essential while mapping to make the most out of the investment you do. So these characters will also be a type of speed mappers, even though they will be more specialized towards different content than maybe a juicer or a normal speed mapper. They might run lower tiers of maps and such for more loot, because lower tier maps still drop the same amount of loot even though it's not the higher eye level items. They often give up damage and maybe some tankiness and speed, but primarily usually damage and tankiness they give up for more item quantity and item rarity. And then we have the category of juicers. So for these builds, this is essentially the ones that will be doing the full 5 Delirium Orb maps or the Delirium Mirror farming strategies where you have incredibly high density and monsters are very tanky. So these builds will potentially give up some speed for tankiness and damage, but they're still the main goal of being speed mappers, right? Because every mapper wants to clear content as quickly as possible. So, but these builds are the ones that are more focused on ramping up your headhunter potentially, or just having higher base damage and base tankiness to be able to clear the maps comfortably. And here we have the list of all the abilities that I will be going over at any point in this video. I will list them as following. So for example, here we have Explosive Arrow, which will be listed inside the Templar, Witch, and Duelist. As I said, you can use the timestamps in the video slider to find the different sections if you already know what you want to play. But yeah, so these are the skills we're going to go over. Explosive Arrow, specifically the Ballista version of that build, is going to be Templar, Witch, and Duelist for the starter builds. Then we have the Spectral Helix, a different two variations on that build. We have in the Ranger section, we have Poisonous Concoction Starter in the Ranger also. Then we have Righteous Fire in Templar. We have Summon Skeletons or Summon Skeletal Mages specifically in the Witch section. Corrupting Fever, Kinetic Blast in Duelist, and then the Seismic Trap, Exsanguinate Trap combination in the notable mentions, which will be in the last part of the video. Essentially because I didn't do a lot of shadow builds and I didn't really give an opportunity or links resources for builds to transition into from the shadow, but it's still an extremely good build and a good build to start with. And now for the endgame builds, which might be the most interesting part. So these are essentially the builds that you will not want to start with in League. Essentially you want to start with one of the skills I mentioned right before this, and then transition once you have farmed up enough currency to make a comfortable transition into these builds. They might have expensive uniques, or you might need to scale more damage before you will be able to clear comfortably with them. Maybe it's just that you won't be able to clear your Atlas out comfortably the first time you're going to run these builds. So essentially these are the builds that I recommend you save up some currency at the start of the league to potentially transition into from the starter skills. So what we have here is Tornado Shot in the Ranger, Magic Find, and Juicer section. We have Kinetic Blast in the same sections. We have Lightning Strike in the Ranger and Duelist section. We have Lightning Arrow in the Magic Find section only, which will be Ranger. We have the Spark for the Templar. Ethereal Knives, also Templar. Winter Orb in Witch. And we have Corrupting Fever again in Duelist, and then Spectral Helix for Ranger. So here is the first base character I will be going over. This is the Ranger section. So at the top I have listed the starter builds, which I think is excellent to start with in the current state of the game. And then I will, for each of these sections, go over the nerfs to look out for in the patch notes before the league is released. I might make a video on the different builds and which ones didn't really get affected by the by the patch notes once they are released. No promises, but you can look out for that video if you have the desire to do so. So essentially we have the Deadeye elemental damage Spectral Helix, and then we have the Pathfinder, which will be a poison version of the Spectral Helix. Both are excellent starter builds. We have the Pathfinder Poisonous Concoction, also a very good starter. And all of these are in the Ranger, so you can comfortably transition into the builds that I have listed below that, which is Deadeye for Tornado Shutter. We have a Deadeye Kinetic Blast, Spectral Helix. Both of them work for speed mapping, although they might not be as scalable as I would call a Tornado Shot or Kinetic Blast. And then we also have the excellent build of a Raider with Lightning Strike. And essentially the nerfs to look out for if you want to roll any of these builds. For the starters, you want to check out Nightblade, Trinity, the skills and general nerfs. So Nightblade is very heavy damage for the Spectral Helix with the claws, and Trinity for the elemental version. For the end game, you really want to make sure if Omniscience, if Omniscience get nerfed, a lot of builds are essentially going to be bricked, or you will essentially have to rework them completely to incorporate different mechanics or damage sources. We also have the interrogation, essentially how early you can swap into Tornado Shot. The Tornado Shot build that I have linked is the Path of Math and Crouching Tuna. So Path of Math is using the interrogation, which essentially, yeah, he goes over it in his video, but if Brittle or interrogation gets nerfed, you might not be able to as comfortably transition as early into Tornado Shot. Also look out for general skill nerfs and ascendancy nerfs here. And after each of these characters, I will be showing you one slide like this. Although you don't have to copy it from here, I will link a spreadsheet in the description below where I will link all of the build sources that I include in this video. So if you want to take one of these builds or path of buildings, then just check the spreadsheet in the description. But essentially here we have the Tripolar Bear Pathfinder Spectral Helix as a poison starter. We have Kobe, he's Deadeye Spectral Helix, which is the elemental damage one. Also Jung Rowan, I think they essentially collaborated, or they assisted each other on that, so those builds are very similar, but Jung Rowan's might be a bit more tanky. Then you have the Esoro Poison Concoction Pathfinder, which is also a perfect starter. And then, as I said before, we have Crouching Tunas and Path of Math's Tornado Shot. Crouching Tunas might be harder to get started. You need a Watcher's Eye and a alt quality gem Tornado Shot to get it working. And Path of Math's is using Brittle, the interrogation gem, which Crouching Tunas isn't. And then we have a Path of Building for a Deadeye Kinetic Blast character, which is set up for speed mapping essentially. We also have Esoro's Raider with Lightning Strike here. And now we jump into the Templar portion of the builds. So for starters, we have two very strong builds, and the first one is Inquisitor. You're going to go with Righteous Fire. It's very cheap to get started. You can transition into Righteous Fire during leveling at around 38 or so after you get your second lab. We also have the Hierophant, Breeze to level as Explosive Arrow Ballistas. And essentially these builds are great for starting with. The endgame builds below that I have listed is the Inquisitor Sparker. You can also go Champion. I haven't sourced any of that, but Inquisitor Sparker, which is very strong unless it gets nerfed. We also have the Inquisitor for Ethereal Knives, also a very strong contender. I've seen a lot of people play it in 3.17, so check out that if you want to also. So nerfs to look out for the starter builds in Templar section is essentially Legacy of Fury, the boots that Righteous Fire use. I doubt they will get nerfed, but it's good to have in mind. Essentially your map clear won't be nearly good enough or for it to feel very nice in the early game with Righteous Fire if those boots get jacked for some reason. Then we also have the general explosive arrow ballista or ignite nerfs, which might make explosive arrow or the ballistas obsolete essentially. For endgame, there isn't really much that could change here. Maybe some base scalings of skills or ascendancies, but I highly doubt it. But yeah, so that's things to look out for. So here we have the sources for the Templar builds. This is essentially a great starter. Pox and Ciceron made a collaboration on Ciceron's YouTube where they are going over the Righteous Fire Inquisitor all the way from starter to good endgame gear, and that's overall a very solid choice. And then we have Ciceron again, which you will see is a upcoming theme on this channel. Ciceron makes great build guides, where we have his Hierophant for EA Ballistas. That video also goes over the champion version. And for the endgame builds, I have a path of building for the ethereal knives, but Ciceron made a great video for the Inquisitor Sparker. In this section, I will go over witches, and we have Elementalist to start with, again with the Explosive Arrow Ballistas. Very solid build right now, especially for softcore. And we have the Necromancer with the Summon Skeletons. These are very good starter builds, very easy to get going in my opinion, and they can easily transition into the Occultist for Winter Orb. There are some other niche speed clearing builds like the uh, cast on crit Occultists, but I didn't choose to include this in the or those builds in this video. Sorry, stumbling on my words a bit there. So for nerfs to look out for in this section is the anything basically that has to do with the necromancer, summon skeletons, or any of that interaction. We also have the ignite or explosive arrow again, same as in the other sections. For endgame, not really much that is probably going to change here. It's been a solid build with the void battery, power charge stacking for a long time. I have a hard time seeing that will change, but look out for base damage scalings and if any ascendancies get nerfed very hard here. Here are the build sources for the witch builds. We have a Necromancer Skeleton Mages build as a YouTube video. We have Crouching Tuna's video on Elementalist Explosive Arrow Ballistas, and a website that went over what I thought was a pretty good build of the Occultist Winter Orb. Uh, all of these builds are pretty solid in my opinion. And here we have the Duelist, let's not forget about him. It's a very solid start choice. We have the Champion or Gladiator Corrupting Fever Kinetic Blast build. Champion, bit more tanky, Gladiator, a bit more quality of life with the bleed explosions and potentially more damage, I would say. We also have the Champion Explosive Arrow Ballistas. These are both great starters unless nerfed. Gladiator, Tornado Shot Corrupting Fever for endgame build, very solid choice, but can be a bit finicky to get the damage going enough. And but essentially, once you have the correct setup, it will be a breeze to play. We also have the champion with Lightning Strike, a bit more tanky, I would say, than the Raider version, but also a bit slower, but very good endgame build also. And nerfs to look out for here: Corrupting Fever, Explosive Arrow Ballistas, and Ignite, of course, since that is the most of the builds here. We also have the Night Stalker and Omniscience nerf that we have to look out for the end game build as Lightning Strike, and Corrupting Fever again for the end game build with Tornado Shot. So here we have the Duelist build sources. We have two Cicerone links to start off: Champion EA Ballistas and Champion Kinetic Blast Corrupting Fever. We also have Race QT's Gladiator Kinetic Blast Corrupting Fever, my bad. Then we have for the endgame builds Cicerone Champion again with the Lightning Strike, and Grimrose video on Gladiator Tornado Shot for Corrupting Fever. And this slide might look familiar, so this is essentially where I will show off the small list of magic finders that I will be showcasing here. We have only rangers for this category, and it's essentially the same starters as the last ranger slide, but here we have transitional builds into magic find specific builds, and those would be the Tornado Shot, Kinetic Blast, and Lightning Arrow all on Deadeye, and then the Raider Lightning Strike. Same thing here to look out for as in the last Ranger slide, the Nightblade and Trinity. Also, again, upcoming theme, always Omniscience. If this gets nerfed badly, a lot of these builds won't be very good. Here we have the build sources for these builds. I didn't really find any good sources on videos for these builds, but also I think if you're going to roll with a magic finder, you should have a bit more experience with putting together a character that's working than as if you're very unsure about it, then maybe this isn't for you. So essentially I just linked Path of Buildings, 4 different ones for the 4 different builds. All of these are very niche characters specifically for maybe low tier mapping, or once you get your damage with good weapons and such going, higher tier maps, and mostly uniques, so they can be a struggle to put together effectively. Same thing here. The slide looks very familiar to the Ranger slide, but this is the only builds that I will be listing for juicing. There are more builds, but these are the ones that I would highly recommend if things don't change too much from 3.17. So we have the same starters as the Ranger slide. You can go back in the timestamps to look at that. But for the juicer builds, I will be recommending the Tornado Shot once again, and the Kinetic Blast once again for Deadeye. Both of these are probably my go-to for juicers if they are still viable. And we also have a Pathfinder with Poison Spectral Helix. I think this is very tanky and can get the damage output to comfortably clear Delirium and other juicy content. Nerfs to look out for here. The interrogation, maybe not as applicable here, but still, if you're going with that version of the Tornado Shot build, then applicable. Omniscience, this will essentially render a lot of builds completely useless, or you will have to remake them completely with other types of items. For the starters, same as the Ranger slide, and other general nerfs to ascendancies and skills is also worth to look out for. Here we have the build guides again. 2 of them are reused, so the one is Crouching Tuna's Tornado Shutter with Fist to Elemental Damage conversion. You can go with Path of Matt's build also, but you have to make some changes to the POE. Essentially, I would not recommend to run his version for map juicing without making a few changes. We also have Tripolar Bear's Pathfinder with Spectral Helix. Also Path of Matt, the build I was talking about, is linked in the Ranger section. But yeah, Tripolar Bear with his Spectral Helix Poison build again, very solid. Deadeye Kinetic Blast, this is essentially the pinnacle of juicers. This build you should not play if you're not comfortable with the game and know what you're doing. You will have a Headhunter and Inspired Learnings. You're going to ramp each map. You're going to run around unramped with very low resistances and very low defenses. This is a build only for the experienced, I would say, and those that really know what they're doing while mapping and have a good experience with putting builds together in the game. And then we have this guy. I just couldn't leave it out. I think this will be one of the best starter builds, but I didn't really feel I had much to contribute with other endgame builds. You can run the Winter Orb on Assassin, very niche. It's probably going to get nerfed with the Omniscience and Annihilation combination. But if it doesn't, you can go Seismic Trap with Shadow. It's a perfect starter, even if you wanna then level up another character and roll another build. But I just couldn't leave this build out. It's super good. And for the build source, we have the Lalcohol and his Saboteur with Seismic Trap for single target and Exsanguinate Trap for the map clear. So just to rant a little bit, this league has been a blast. It has been one of the best leagues in a very long time, in my opinion. But we also have some pretty overtuned uniques and mechanics right now. So nerfs to really look out for in general, I would say, is definitely Omniscience. If this doesn't nerf, I don't see we will get a big meta change. If it stays as it is in this situation, I think essentially the same builds that was at the top of this league is going to be at the top of next league. And if you're unsure if one of the builds that I have listed in the previous sections is going to work in next league, if they use Omniscience and this item gets gutted, you can simply disregard that unless you are very comfortable with changing a build into a whole new concept around different items. We also have the Ashes of the Stars. It's a very great item that I also think has the potential to possibly get nerfed a bit for some of the builds that would be using it. Melding of Flesh might not get nerfed, but it's important to keep in mind because it is used in some of the builds and it is quite overtuned. We also have things to look out for. General buffs and nerfs to skill gems is always very important to keep in mind. If you want to play a skill that its base damage gets nerfed by 30-40%, then you should definitely consider maybe rolling another build. And we also have the same thing for just broad changes to ascendancies or different uniques that would be included in some niche builds. Always look out for that. If you, let's say, thinking about rolling an occultist and the chaos explodes would get nerfed, then you might want to reconsider there as well. So that was all for this video. As I said, the spreadsheet with the different build sources will be linked in the description. Gladly check those out if you're interested in any of these builds. 3.18, I will be going hard. I will post more content. I will also be streaming on Twitch for the league start and most of the league. I might, as I said, when it gets closer to the next patch, post an update video on this guide or this showcase where I will be telling you which builds I would avoid essentially after we get the patch notes. But I'm really excited for next league and I hope you are as well. So without further to say, please subscribe, like and comment on this video. It really helps me out with the algorithm and I would gladly see my community growing a bit. And you can also find a link to my Twitch in the description down below or in the pinned comment. And without further to say, goodbye.